They knew I was a single dad, and they still cut my pay by 58%. No warning, no reason. Just a cold email with restructuring in the subject line. I stared at the numbers on the screen, the way the salary dropped like a guillotine. My hands didn't shake. My coffee didn't spill. I just sat there, listening to the low hum of the office air conditioner, realizing that 13 years of loyalty had just been priced down to a bad joke. My name's Ethan Cole, 45, senior network engineer at a logistics software company called Transaxis Systems in Denver. At least I was. I've been the guy who fixes what no one else can even find. The one they call at midnight when servers go down or shipments stall in 30 states. I'd been the quiet constant, the man who never missed a deadline, who trained the interns, who rebuilt the entire data architecture after a ransomware scare. And yet, that morning, I became a line item in someone's cost-cutting spreadsheet. They called it budget realignment. I called it what it was, betrayal. Still, I didn't yell, didn't storm into my manager's office. They were waiting for that, waiting to mark me as disruptive, to justify walking me out under security escort. So I nodded, signed the revised contract, collected the papers in silence. The HR rep looked relieved, like she'd just defused a bomb. I went home early that day. My son, Luke, 12 years old, was building a Lego tower on the living room rug. He looked up, smiling, and said, "You're home already?" I said, "Yeah, just taking a break." I didn't tell him that the roof above us was now hanging by a financial thread. That night, after he went to bed, I opened my laptop and scrolled through old company files, not out of anger, but habit. Years of documentation, backups, system maps I'd built for them. Every single database, every login chain, every vulnerability I'd ever quietly fixed. I realized something then. Without me, Transaxis didn't actually know how its own systems worked. They'd cut my pay because they thought I was replaceable. So I decided to let them prove it. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't break a law. I simply withdrew my access, my quiet safety nets, the invisible code routines that kept everything running smoothly, the ones no one even knew existed. The next morning, their internal monitoring started lighting up with minor alerts. Nothing big, just friction. I ignored the texts from work. By Friday, the friction had turned into chaos, and I hadn't raised my voice once. That was just the beginning. I didn't sleep much that weekend, not because I was angry, but because my mind wouldn't stop running simulations. Years of working in systems had rewired my brain to think like one. Inputs, outputs, dependencies. Every process, every workflow at Transaxis was connected like veins in a body. I'd been its heart, steady, unseen, keeping the blood moving. They thought they could cut me out, and the organism would keep breathing. I knew better. On Monday morning, I logged in one last time, just to watch. Not interfere, watch. Within an hour, the first ripple appeared. A server timeout in Chicago, then 2 more in Dallas. I knew what it meant. Their automation scripts were colliding, trying to compensate for missing oversight. Oversight that had been me. They'd brought in a new efficiency consultant 2 months ago, a sharp-suited MBA named Randall Price. He was the one who pushed the pay cuts, calling it a necessary transition. Randall believed systems ran themselves. He was about to learn that systems are only as stable as the man who built them. At noon, I got a call from Jenna, a junior admin I'd mentored for 3 years. She sounded nervous, said the logistics dashboard was showing negative inventory values across multiple warehouses. I told her I didn't work there anymore. She apologized, whispered that Randall was in a panic, and hung up. I closed my laptop. That night, I cooked dinner with Luke, helped him with his math homework, and tucked him in. Simple, quiet moments. But beneath that calm, I could feel something shifting, not revenge, not satisfaction, just inevitability, like gravity doing its work. By Wednesday, I started getting LinkedIn messages from former colleagues. Something about urgent rehiring, critical system outages, full-blown data corruption. I didn't answer. They'd find no trace of sabotage, no code tampering, no malware, just missing logic. The quiet routines I'd once kept alive through manual oversight. They'd never thought to automate them, because I'd always been there to catch the fall. That Friday, Randall himself called. His tone was different now. Softer. Desperate. Said they'd reconsider the pay structure. that they wanted to discuss my return under revised conditions. I said I'd think about it. Then I hung up. That was the moment I realized I wasn't going back. The system that had undervalued me was collapsing under its own arrogance. And all I'd done was walk away. The real dismantling hadn't even started yet. By the second week, Transaxis wasn't just struggling, it was unraveling. Clients were missing shipments, invoices were duplicating, and the central routing algorithm was spinning out garbage data. It was like watching a machine forget how to breathe. And yet, I didn't touch a thing. I didn't have to. Every error they were seeing was the result of shortcuts they'd made over the years, things I'd quietly corrected by hand. When I left, those corrections left with me. I started getting messages from people who used to ignore me. Upper management, project leads, even the CFO. Each one trying to sound professional, but you could feel the panic between the lines. I didn't reply to any of them. I wasn't angry anymore. I was observant, watching the tower I'd built sway under its own weight. Randall sent another message, longer this time, explaining that a series of unforeseen system failures had led to a company-wide crisis. He hinted at bonuses, equity options, anything that might tempt me back. I closed the message without reading the rest. They were learning something I'd known my whole life. Loyalty can't be bought retroactively. Luke noticed I was quieter that week. I told him I was working on something new. He smiled, said he liked when I worked from home because the house felt calmer. He didn't know that behind that calm was a mind running diagnostics on a crumbling empire. By Thursday, I heard through a former coworker that Transaxis had called in a third-party cybersecurity firm to assess the damage. They suspected a breach, maybe even sabotage. That was the irony. There was no sabotage, no external threat, just absence. The absence of one man who'd understood the system better than the people who owned it. On Friday morning, a local business journal published an article. Transaxis Systems faces widespread disruptions amid internal turmoil. I read it over black coffee, noting the quotes from executives blaming technical irregularities and legacy infrastructure challenges. Legacy infrastructure. That was me. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just printed the article and folded it neatly into a file marked proof. Because what was happening wasn't revenge, it was record-keeping. 2 weeks earlier, they'd cut my pay by 58%. Now they were losing millions. And I hadn't raised my voice once. That weekend, I drove out past the city to the old reservoir where I used to take Luke fishing. The air was cold, clear, quiet. I needed that. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't someone's employee. I was a man with no obligations to anyone's clock but my own. I sat on the hood of my truck, watching the light move over the water, and thought about how many years I'd traded for a paycheck that could vanish with a single decision. By Monday morning, the collapse was no longer an internal problem. Clients were posting about delays, broken integrations, and corrupted tracking data. Hashtags started trending. The company's official Twitter account tried to calm the storm, but you could feel the desperation in every response. I didn't smile. I didn't share it. I just observed. A former coworker, Jenna, sent me another message. She said Randall had been forced to take administrative leave and that upper management was in chaos. The board had called an emergency session. She told me that Daniel, the CFO, blamed incomplete documentation for the meltdown. I almost laughed. There had never been incomplete documentation. There had just been me, the person who knew where everything lived. I decided to make a single move. Not an attack, not revenge, just truth. I compiled the clean, complete system documentation I'd created over the years, the files I'd quietly saved in personal archives. I added timestamps, version histories, access logs, proof that everything they'd lost had once been in perfect order. Then I attached one file. Transaxis_system_integrity_archive. Zip. No threats, no demands. Just a message, for reference. Then I sent it directly to the company's board of directors. That night, I put my phone on silent and cooked dinner with Luke again. He asked if I was working somewhere new yet. I told him, not yet, but soon. He nodded, satisfied. To him, I was just Dad. To the board of Transaxis, I'd just dropped a truth bomb in a zip folder. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls from a private number and 1 voicemail from an unfamiliar voice. A woman said she represented the board and wanted to meet, regarding a matter of urgent concern. I knew exactly what that concern was. Their system hadn't just collapsed. Their leadership was next. I met with the board 2 days later at a downtown hotel. Not in their glass-walled office. Too many eyes, too much noise. This meeting was quiet, deliberate, the kind where real power moves. The woman from the voicemail introduced herself as Karen Holt, interim chair. She looked calm, but her eyes told a different story. Panic, controlled by habit. She thanked me for coming on such short notice, said they'd reviewed the file I sent. They wanted to clarify a few discrepancies. I nodded. I didn't volunteer anything. Let silence do the work. She eventually filled it. Said that the files I provided proved beyond doubt that the failures weren't due to system flaws, but to negligence. Documentation had been intentionally removed from shared drives months before my pay cut. I said I wasn't surprised. She studied me, then asked what I wanted. I told her nothing. I was just making sure the record was complete. She didn't buy that. People like her don't understand someone who acts without visible motive. She kept circling back, asking about Randall, about whether I'd spoken to the press. I said no to both, which was true. At the end of the meeting, she asked if I'd consider returning temporarily, just to stabilize the systems. Name your rate, she said. I told her I'd think about it. She handed me her card. As I walked out, I noticed 2 of the company's lawyers waiting in the lobby. They didn't look like they were there for small talk. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, card in hand, watching Luke do his homework across from me. I thought about what returning would mean. The same building, the same people, the same empty promises. I realized it wasn't about money anymore. It was about control. And control didn't mean having access to their systems. It meant walking away with my peace intact. Before bed, I drafted a short email to Karen. I appreciate the offer, but I've moved on. Best of luck with your transition. I hit send. The next morning, I read the news headline over coffee. Transaxis Systems faces executive overhaul amid internal investigation. Randall's name was mentioned. So was Daniel's. I didn't smile. I just closed the paper, looked out the window, and thought the quiet part was over. Now the reckoning would begin. The news spread fast. Within a week, Transaxis was the headline of every tech and business outlet from Denver to San Francisco. Corporate mismanagement, system collapse, employee exodus. The words I'd seen 100 times before, but now they had names attached. Randall Price, Daniel Lowe, and 3 other executives whose arrogance had once filled the boardroom. I didn't leak anything. I didn't need to. The truth was already there, buried in the audit logs, in deleted files, in every corner of a system that had recorded their greed with perfect precision. All I did was make it visible. At night, after Luke went to bed, I'd sit in the quiet of the house and watch the story unfold like a slow-motion implosion. The company stock dropped 22% in 3 days. Clients were pulling contracts. Lawsuits were being filed. I thought about how easily they'd justified cutting my pay, about the smirk on Randall's face when he called it a simple recalibration. Now the recalibration was complete. The scales had balanced themselves. But I wasn't celebrating. I was rebuilding. While Transaxis burned, I started my own consulting firm, small, quiet, focused. I called it Cole Systems Integrity. I didn't advertise. Word of mouth was enough. 2 of Transaxis's former clients reached out within a week, asking if I could stabilize their networks. I did. Efficiently. Discreetly. They paid well and on time. One afternoon, while reviewing a project proposal, I got an email from Jenna. She'd resigned after the investigation began. She thanked me, said the company culture was toxic and that people were finally speaking out. She mentioned that Randall was facing potential charges for falsifying reports to secure bonuses. I read the message twice, then deleted it. Closure doesn't need a response. That night, Luke and I walked through the park near our house. He asked if things were better now. I said they were. Not perfect, just better. He nodded, satisfied. Kids have a way of knowing when the storm has passed, even if they don't understand what caused it. The following morning, I received a registered letter with a corporate seal. It wasn't from Transaxis, but from their legal counsel. The first line read, "We are requesting your cooperation in an ongoing federal inquiry." I smiled, folded the letter carefully, and placed it next to the file marked proof. The system hadn't just collapsed. Now, it was turning itself inside out. The letter from Transaxis's legal team wasn't a surprise, only a matter of timing. When you pull the truth into daylight, people start scrambling for shade. They called it an inquiry, but I knew what it really was, a cleanup operation. The board was trying to protect itself before the shareholders turned on them. I didn't rush to respond. I waited 3 days. During that time, I called an old friend, Mark Alvarez, a cybersecurity attorney I'd served with in the military before civilian life swallowed us both. He reviewed the letter and said exactly what I expected: cooperate, but on your terms. Transparency, but controlled. When I finally replied, my message was short and precise, a mirror of their tone. I confirmed that I was willing to assist, provided all communication went through counsel and all sessions were recorded. No more backroom discussions, no misquotes, no selective memory. The first meeting took place over video conference. There were 6 of them: attorneys, consultants, a board representative. They thanked me for my time and cooperation. I said nothing. They asked about internal processes, redundancies, oversight. I answered factually, never emotionally. When one of them hinted that my exit timing aligned suspiciously with the collapse, I simply said, "I left when you cut my pay by 58%. Silence followed. It lasted a full 10 seconds before anyone spoke again. After the call, I closed my laptop and stared at the reflection in the screen. Not the same man who'd walked out of that office weeks ago. Back then, I'd been exhausted, resigned. Now, there was something sharper in my gaze: clarity. They'd underestimated the cost of integrity. That night, I tucked Luke into bed and sat by the window for a long time, listening to the wind move through the trees. I thought about how quiet justice really is. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand apologies. It just arrives, steady, unhurried, and absolute. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Karen Holt, the interim chair. She said she appreciated my professionalism and hoped I'd find closure in knowing the truth is being addressed. Closure. That word again. People love to say it when they want to end a story. But I wasn't done yet. Because closure wasn't the goal. Accountability was. 3 weeks later, the investigation went public. What started as quiet whispers inside the company became a storm on every business news site. The Securities and Exchange Commission had opened a formal inquiry into Transaxis systems. Fraud, data manipulation, and executive misconduct were the official charges. My name wasn't in the headlines, but my fingerprints were on every piece of evidence that made those headlines possible. Reporters started reaching out: emails, LinkedIn messages, even a handwritten letter from a journalist in New York. They wanted a quote, a statement, a confession, something to make their stories more human. I didn't give them one. The story didn't need my voice. It already had my work. One night, after putting Luke to bed, I sat in the living room with the lights off and scrolled through the coverage on my phone. Randall had been arrested on suspicion of falsifying quarterly reports to inflate bonuses. Daniel was facing an ethics probe. 2 members of the board had resigned quietly before their names could make the papers. The machine had eaten itself. I thought about the day they cut my pay, about the silence in that conference room, the way no one met my eyes. Back then, I'd walked out feeling small, like a man shrinking inside his own skin. Now, the same silence had flipped on them. They were the ones avoiding cameras, lawyers whispering in their ears, calculating how to save themselves. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't negotiate. It just waits. One afternoon, Karen Holt called again. Her tone was careful, formal, but softer than before. She said the board had voted to offer me a consulting contract, not to return, but to rebuild what had collapsed. She said I could name my rate. I told her I didn't rebuild what others had destroyed. I build new things. After the call, I watched Luke shoot hoops in the driveway, his laughter echoing down the street. I realized that was the real rebuild, the life beyond their walls, the freedom they couldn't cut in half. That night, as I shut down my computer, I saw a final notification: Transaxis stock delisted from the exchange. Years of greed erased in one line of text. I poured myself a drink and whispered to the empty room. System restored. Months passed. The storm around Transaxis finally quieted, leaving behind headlines that faded like old ink. The company was gone, absorbed by another firm that wanted the scraps, patents, client lists, anything salvageable. Most of the executives who'd once dismissed me were either jobless or under investigation. Randall had taken a plea deal. Daniel vanished into what the news called an extended sabbatical. As for me, life had settled into something simpler, cleaner. My consulting firm was growing. Word spread among small and mid-sized companies that I was the guy who could fix what others had broken. Not just their systems, their structure. I didn't promise miracles. I promised stability. And for men like me, that meant something. One afternoon, while I was at a client's office, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. It was Jenna. She'd started her own IT training company, focused on helping single parents break into tech. She said she'd used some of my old training materials, the ones I'd written years ago for Transaxis. She asked if I minded. I told her to keep them. Knowledge should move forward, not stay locked in someone's server. That evening, I drove home through the fading light, thinking about how much had changed. A year ago, I was a man defined by his job. Now, I was defined by what I'd walked away from. That kind of freedom doesn't make noise. It hums quietly, steady as a heartbeat. After dinner, Luke sat next to me on the couch, showing me a school project about heroes. He'd drawn a picture of two people, him and me, standing in front of a computer with a broken wire fixed between us. I asked who it was supposed to be. He said us, because we fix things. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I was proud, but because that simple truth hit deeper than anything I'd done to that company. I hadn't just dismantled a broken system. I'd built something better in its place. And I did it the same way I'd done everything else, quietly, methodically, without ever raising my voice. A year after Transaxis fell, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Inside was a folded letter and a check. The letter was from Karen Holt. She wrote that the company's assets had been liquidated and a small settlement was being issued to certain employees whose work had been foundational to the company's original success. The check wasn't large, but it was symbolic. Payment for everything they had taken for granted. I didn't cash it. I tucked it into the same file where I kept the article, the emails, the proof, a silent record of what happens when arrogance meets precision. Then I closed the drawer and left it there. Some victories don't need trophies. Life had its rhythm again. I'd wake up early, make breakfast for Luke, walk him to school, then spend the day working with clients who respected the craft, not just the cost. The house felt lighter. The silence that once used to choke now felt earned. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was space. One evening, Luke and I drove out to the same reservoir where it all started. The water was still, the sky painted in soft shades of blue and amber. He asked if I missed my old job. I told him no, but I did miss the version of myself who believed loyalty could protect you. He nodded like he understood more than a 12-year-old should. Maybe he did. As the sun sank behind the ridge, I thought about the path that brought me here. The pay cut, the humiliation, the quiet dismantling of a machine that forgot who built it. I hadn't sought revenge, only balance. And in restoring it, I'd found something bigger, peace. When we got home, I opened my laptop one last time that night and looked over a proposal for a new client. A logistics startup, small but ambitious. They wanted me to design their security architecture from scratch. The founder wrote, "We want to build something that lasts." I smiled. For the first time in years, I felt that same steady focus return, not to destroy, but to create. Because the quiet man they'd underestimated hadn't disappeared. He'd just learned where to put his silence. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.